Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Nun Gimel, and we begin here on the bottom of Nun Beis Amid Beis, and we had a Mishnah here on the bottom of Nun Beis Amid Beis, and the Gemara presented a machlokes regarding Rav Hillel. And Rav Hillel, there are two versions in the Gemara in the statement of Rav Hillel, which has to do with an Avoda Zara that's owned by Yisrael, and a guy and their shutfim, their partners in the ownership of this idol. And the question is whether or not the akum can be mavatel this idol. So the Gemara says, just to start our daf here on the bottom of Nun Beis Amid Beis, Ika de Masnile Aseifa. So the possibility is that Rav Hillel was referring to the Seifa of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says in the Seifa, Yisrael einu mevatel avodas kochavim shel ovdei kochavim. And Rav Hillel had a problem with this. What do you mean a Jew cannot be mevatel an idol that belongs to a guy? Pshita, that we know. I don't need the Mishnah to tell me that. Only an akum could be mevatel an idol. O Rav Hillel, Berei the Rebbe Valis, and here we start our daf for today, Nun Gimel. Lo nitzracha sheyesh lo ba shutfis. The Mishnah is talking about a case of shutfim. There's a partnership between the non-Jew and the Jew in this idol, and ownership of the idol. And kol mashmalan, the Mishnah wants to tell us Yisrael hu delo mavatel diovei kochavim. In this case, the Yisrael can't nullify anything at all. He cannot nullify and be mavatel his portion, his chelik in the ownership of the idol. Nor can he be mavatel the ownership, the half of the ownership of the idol that's owned by the guy. Aval ove kocham denafshe mavatel. But the pella is that according to Hillel, the guy who has shutfis, he could be mavatel not only his portion of the idol, but even the Jew's portion of the idol. So that is one presentation of Rav Hillel. The Gemara offers a different presentation of Rav Hillel, according to which Rav Hillel was not making his comment on the Sefer, but rather on a Brisa. The Brisa says, Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Avoda kochavim shel Yisrael ein la bitul olamis. If a guy wants to be mevatel the idol of a Jew, he cannot do so because the idol of a Jew can never be subject to bittul. What does that mean? My olamis, Omer of Hillel Braid Ravalis, lo nitzchal sheyesh lo li ove kacham bashutvis, v'kamash malon di Yisrael adaiti dinafshe polach. Meaning that even though the guy has shutvis and half of the idol is his, nevertheless, since the Jew has his own belief in his half of the idol, therefore, the Ove Kochavim has no power to be mevatel the part of the idol that's owned by the Jew. He can only be mevatel his half. So just to summarize, the two presentations of Rav Hillel that we just learned today, one on Daf Nun Beis Amid Beis on the bottom and the other on Nun Gimel, are divided over the following question. Did Rav Hillel allow a guy who has shutfis in an idol together with a Jew to be mevatel the idol Or no, he can only be mevatel his half of the idol. But Yisrael adaiti denafshe polach. He worships the idol on his own independent mindset. So now we begin the Mishnah here on Daf Nun Gimel. Ketzad mevatla. Now, I think that we could say the following, that bittul comes under two different categories. One is a physical change in the idol, and the Mishnah is going to describe when that physical change is profound enough to qualify as bittul, when it's not. But there's another method of bittul in which the guy, without physically breaking anything off of the idol, but nevertheless, he indicates that he no longer believes in the idol. So that's more of a like a conceptual kind of bittul. But first, the Mishnah is addressing the physical bittul. Number one, kata rosh ozna. Now, this is a very profound kind of bittul. Why? Because the Torah says in Parshas Mishpatim that if an Eved Ivri decides that he wants to remain an Eved even after the period of time, the 6 years has passed, then we bore a hole in his ear to indicate that he is an Eved. So that the guy is now boring a hole in the ear of the idol, making a statement that you worship me. I don't worship you anymore. I'm going to bore a hole in your ear. A less profound method of bittul is Rosh Chotmo. So again, he still is disfiguring the face of the idol, but not at the ear, but rather at the tip of the nose. And finally, the least profound way of physically damaging the idol as a Maisa Bittul is Rosh Etzba'ah, right? So the idol has fingers, and he cuts off the tip of one of the fingers. Now, the Mishnah has a different possibility of physical nullification, where he doesn't take anything, any part or limb of the idol and cut it off, but rather he bends the idol, and that's called pchasa. He puts a dent in the idol. Afal pishlo chisra. The Mishnah says even though he didn't take off anything, cut off anything from the idol, it's still bitla, it's still nullification. Now the Sefer of the Mishnah is going to address various actions that the idol worshiper does in front of the idol that are very deprecating. For example, rock b'faneh, he spits in front of the idol. Hishtin b'faneh, he pishes. Gera, or he drags the idol through the mud. Zarak ba es hatzoa, he throws feces at the face of the idol. In all these cases, you would have said that although he doesn't damage the idol per se, but this repulsive act is to depreciate the idol, certainly should qualify as bittul. But the Mishnah says no. Harei zu eina b'tela. This does not qualify as bittul. It means that he temporarily is angry. Why didn't his deity come through in the clutch? So he insults his deity, but he still really believes in his deity. However, machara, we're going to have a machlokas in a case where he sells the idol for money. So he wants to make a buck on the idol. Oh, mishkino, let's say he borrows money and he offers his idol as a mashkon, which means it's collateral in such case that if he defaults on payment to the loan, then the lender will take the idol and now he owns it. Is according to Rebbe Omer bitla. That is an act of bittul. If you have a deity, you don't sell it. Chachamim Omer lo bittul. Chacham say no. You know what? He may sell it to another guy, And that guy will also worship the idol, so he still has the deference for the idol. And even if he defaults on his loan, the lender will continue to worship that idol. So therefore, it's not bittul. Now the Gemara talks about this idea in the second category of denting the idol. The Gemara asks, "Kilo chisra b'may bitla." So if he didn't take off a limb from the idol, where's the bitl? And the Gemara answers, "Amar Zara shepachasa bifaneh." He dents the face of the idol, and that is equal to taking a piece and diminishing the idol, and it's bitl. Rakak bifaneh v'hishnim bifaneh. That's not bitl. Minani immediately. How do we know such a thing? And it's very interesting that the Gemara understands that the whole mechanism of bittul is biblical, it's scriptural, it comes from the Torah, and whatever exceptions to the rule of bittul, we have to derive it from the Torah itself. So here's a case, as we said before, where the idolater is so disappointed in his deity that he abandons it. And you would have thought that maybe that is a rejection of the idol and it should qualify as bittul. No, Amar Chizkiah, we have a pasuk. The Amar Kra, the Torah says in Yeshayahu Hanavi, it says, "B'haya ki yirav," right? The idolater is in a state of famine, of hunger. V'skatzaf, and he gets angry at his deity, at his getchka. V'kilel b'malko, and he curses, the king, Ubelahav, and his gods. Upana lamala. Now, this upana lamala is an amazing statement because the claim is that once the idol worshiper loses all faith in his deity, he turns upwards towards the heavens and he believes in the one God. Uksiv basrei, and immediately afterwards the pasuk says, "V'el eretz yabit." Now, wait a second. We just said that upana lamala, he looks upwards towards the heaven. And now the pasuk says, "El eretz yabit," he's looking down at the earth. V'hinei tzara v'chashecha. And what he sees there, we know, is darkness and misfortune, but he doesn't see it that way. The afagav the kilo malko v'elahav, even though he cursed the king and his gods, pana lamala. And momentarily he turns towards the heavens, but Eretz Yabit, that's only temporarily. For that moment, he turns towards the heaven, but really he is totally dedicated to his belief in the deity, and therefore he turns earthward. So therefore, the fact that a guy gets angry and disappointed disheartened by his deity doesn't mean that he's nullifying it. He'll still believe in the deity. The Mishnah records machlokes between Chachamim and Rebbe in a case where he either sold the idol or he gave it as collateral for a loan. Zeiri Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Marav. There's a machlokes here between Zeiri in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yirmiyah in the name of Rav Chad. According to one opinion, machlokes b'tzorev ovei kochavim. He sold his idol to an idolater who's a tzoref. A tzoref is like a blacksmith. And he was hoping that if he needs collateral to get a loan, he will give his idol as a collateral for the loan. And in this case, according to one version, we have a machlokes between Chachamim and Rebbe as to whether or not this constitutes bittul. And the reason for that is because since he's giving it over or offering it as a collateral to an idol worshiper, he still might believe that the idol worshiper will continue, the reverence, etc., for the deity, and therefore it's not bittul. And at least that's the opinion of the Chacham. Avol b'tzarif Yisrael divrei kol bittul. According to one opinion, even though the Chachamim are of the opinion in general, when he gives it over to a guy, that he's not mavatal it, but if he gives it over to a Jew, even the Chacham would agree that it's bittul, because he's not going to rely on the fact that the Jew will continue to worship this idol. But Chadam, according to second version, a second opinion, B'tzoref Yisrael Machlokes. The Machlokes revolves around a case where he gave it to a Jew. Does he believe that the Jew will also continue worshiping the idol, or alternatively, the Jew, to make a buck, will buy his idol and sell it at a higher price to another idol worshiper, and therefore the Chacham say there's no bittul. But presumably, in the case where he sold it to a guy, then for sure, even Rebbe would concede that that's not bittul, because he really relies on the fact that the guy will continue observing reverence to the idol. Iboilahu b'tzaref Yisrael machlokes, avol b'tzaref overkochav direk kol lo bitel, o dilma bein bozeh ubein bozeh machlokes. So the Gemara now vacillates based on the fact that we said that the machlokes is in a case where the guy gave it over to a Jewish blacksmith. Is that bittul or not? Shall we say, therefore, that according to Rebbe, there is bittul when he gives it over to a Jew, but if he gives it over to a guy, even Rebbe agrees that that's not bittul because he expects and relies on the fact that the guy is going to continue worshiping the idol. Oh, Dilma, or should we say, bein bozeh ubein bozeh machlokas. It doesn't matter whether he gave it to a Jew or a guy. Even if he gave it to a guy, according to Rebbe, that constitutes bittul. And why is that? Because he gave it to a tzoref. And the function of a tzoref is to melt down metal. Now, presumably the idol that we're talking about under consideration is a metal idol. And the tzoref is going to convert it back into molten metal. That's what a tzoref is all about. Toshma, the Amar Rebbe, we have a brisa that records that Rebbe made the following statement here in Divarai. I think I'm right that there is bittul kishen machar lechabla, where the owner sold it and he anticipated that the buyer would destroy it. I'm not sure why the buyer bought this idol for the purpose of destroying it, but that's what he told the mocher, I'm going to destroy it. And if the mocher went ahead and sold it to him, then obviously that's bittul. Says Rebbe, I hold that this is bittul, and it's logical to assume it's bittul in the case where the buyer openly declared that he's going to destroy the idol. However, udivrei chaveri, I have to admit that the chacham who rejected my shita have one up it on me, im shemachar liovda, where the buyer said, I am buying this because I want to worship this idol. Then there's no bittul. So the Gemara asks the following: my lechablo, my liobda. Lechablo mamish. If the buyer said, I'm going to destroy it after I buy it from you, and liovda mamish, or the buyer is an idol worshiper and he declares openly he's going to continue to worship the idol, my timer demand the Omar Beetle, my timer demand the Omar low Beetle. We don't understand how anyone like Rebbe could say it's Beetle when the idol worshiper that bought this is explicitly declaring that he will continue to worship it. We don't understand the shita of the Rabbanon that there's no bittul when he sold it to someone who declared openly, explicitly, he's going to destroy it. Elalav. Therefore, we have to reinterpret Rebbe's statement. Lechabla lemisha asid lechabla. What Rebbe meant to say that this is bittul because he sold it lechabla to destroy it. What he really meant is that he sold it to someone who in the future will destroy it. It's not that he sold it to someone who declared afanart on the spot that I'm going to destroy it. Umanu, and what's this case where he sold it and it will be destroyed down the line? Tzoreif Yisrael. So you gave it to a Tzoreif Yisrael. The Tzoreif is going to melt down the metal. And Rebbe says, Nirim Dvarai, my approach and my ruling is very logical because the guy sold it to a Jewish smelter and he knows that this Tzoreif is going to eventually destroy it. Liovda, it doesn't mean that the buyer said explicitly, I am going to worship this idol. He didn't make such an explicit statement. Liovda. Umanu Tzoreif Avakol Chavim. So what's the Tzaref Avikol Chavim? He is going to worship it down the line. Maybe he'll fix the idol and improve upon it. But Shmami, no. What do we see from this statement of Rebbe in the Brisa? That Bein Bozeh ubein Bozeh machlokes, that whether or not the buyer is a smelter who's Jewish or it's a smelter who's non-Jewish is always going to be a machlokas. So basically, to summarize where we're holding now, the Gemara has come to a proof, based on the brisa of Rebbe here, that the machlokas between Rebbe and the Chachamim about whether or not selling an idol constitutes bittul applies whether or not the buyer is an idol worshiper or he's a Jew. He's a non-Jew or a Jew. But now we go back to the first opinion. Remember, we had two opinions, whether it was Rav or Rabbi Yochanan, that the machlokas is when it was sold to an idol worshiper. So now we're in trouble because we just proved from the brisa that the machlokas is twofold, even in the case where he sold it to the Jew. Look, we're going to reinterpret this brisa in a way that it can be reconciled with that opinion in the Gemara that the machlokas is only if he sold it to a guy. Hachi kamar. Amar Rebbe Nir Dvari l'chaverai kishemachro. I seem to have the upper hand in the case where he sold it. Lechabla. And lechabla means a Jew who's a tzoref. And it's his profession to take metal and smelt it down. That's what he's going to do. That's called lechabla. His future intention is lechabla. Umanu tzoref Yisrael. She'af chaver lo nechleku elik shemachli ovda. The machlokas between me and the chachamim only applies in the case where the guy sold it to another idol worship. But they would not argue in the case where he sold it to a Jew. Meisvei halokeach grutos are scraps of metal. Mina ovei kol chavim u'motza behen avodas kol chavim. In the middle of this scrap, he looks, he finds, he discovers an idol in there. So he had no intention of buying an idol. And therefore, it's going to be a mekach tos. It's a sale based on false premises. So now the Brisa makes the following distinction. There are two parts that make up a kinyan when you buy something. And we're talking about metaltal, immovable objects. There is the act of hagbah or mashicha when you do a physical act, and there's paying the money. So the Brisa makes the following distinction. Im ad shelo nosan mos moshach. He hasn't yet been, he hasn't yet paid the money to acquire ownership over these gutos, but he already made mashicha. So he did stage one in the kinyan, but not stage two. In such a case, yachzir, the entire sale is null and void. Give him back the gutos with the idol mixed in, and the sale is invalid. It's void. Why? Because he hasn't yet paid for this item, these gutos, and the kinyan is not complete. If the kinyan is not complete, we apply the principle of mekachtos, and we give him back what he gave you, and that's the end of the story. But if mishanosan mos mosha, if let's say the guy sold the Jew gustros and the Jew discovers an idol inside. So if there was no mos, then the wholesale is null and void, and we're back to square one, no problem. But if he already paid the mos, the sale is now valid. The idol now becomes owned or possessed by the Yisrael, the buyer. And a Yisrael who owns an idol is ein lo bittul olamis. He can never be mevatel it, and therefore the Brisa paskins yolach liyam hamelach. Right? He's got to take this idol, throw it into Yam HaMelech, so he doesn't get any benefit from it. So the Gemara analyzes. If you're going to say, according to that opinion, that the machlokes between Rebbe and the Chachamim is in a case where he sold it to a Jew, and now we say that according to Rebbe, the very fact that the guy sold it to a Jew, knowing full well that the Jew will eventually destroy it, is therefore it's bittul. And the Chacham disagree, and therefore according to Chacham there's no bittul. And I justify what it says here in the Brisa that Yolich, what is it called? Yolich liyam hamelach. Ha mani rabbanan he. Because again, according to Rebbe, the very fact that the guy sold his idol to a Jew, that constitutes bittul. Once it's bittul, then the Jew's allowed to benefit from it. If you're going to tell me that the dispute between Rebbe and the Chacham revolves around a case where he sold it to a guy, everybody agrees that there is bittul when you sell it to a Jew. Here he sold it to a Jew, and yet it says Yolech Hanol Yam HaMelech. Why? Money. It doesn't work out with anybody because everybody agrees universally that if he sells it to a Jew, that itself constitutes bittul. Shiny Hossam, the Adaita de Guto Zovin. Adaita Vos Kochavim Lo Zovin. When the idol worshiper sold it to the Jew, he thought he was selling him pieces of metal, scraps of silver. He didn't have in mind that he was selling the idol, and therefore he wasn't mevatel the idol. Now it comes under the possession of the Jew because he paid for it. He already gave the mos, and therefore, ein lo bittul olamis, he's got to take it and throw it into the Yam HaMelech. Torah Rabbanon, lava oleha. Let's say the owner of the idol, this guy, borrowed money and he gave collateral. He gave the idol as collateral. So you and I would say that, look, the very fact that he's giving it as collateral, he means he's opening himself to the possibility that he'll never get the idol back. Maybe that should be bittul. No, it's not bittul. Osha nafala mapolis, you and I would have said that if it's buried under an avalanche, then for sure he's mevatel it. He doesn't have any anticipation of getting it back unless he hires a bulldozer, to dig up the ground. Osha gnavu listim. I mean, these are armed robbers that stole his idol. Does he have any hope to get it back? Wyatt Earp. I mean, what's going on over here? Osha nichu abailim v'holchulim b'disayam. He didn't take his idol with him when he went out to the far east. And I'm just going to read two words that we'll get to on Omid Bays. We're not yet ready for it, but it'll help us here. Eino b'tela. In all these cases listed, there's no bit, and we have to figure out why. Oh my gosh, he doesn't take the idol with him on a trip. I mean, he needs his idol. It got stolen by armed robbers. Does he have any chance of getting it back? It's underneath an avalanche. Or, for example, he gave the malva his idol as a collateral. The malva is going to take this should be bit, but it's not bit. We have to figure out why.